Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of my YouTube channel, Data Science with Sam. So, this is my first coffee chat series, and I invited two esteemed guests from the scientific research area. So, my first guest is Efrosini Tsouko. So, Efri actually postdoctoral research associate at Baylor College of Medicine. So, her research expertise is mainly related to cancer metabolism and bone biology and pathology. She earned her PhD in cell and molecular biology at University of Houston. And before that, she actually did her graduation at Democritus University of Thrace in Greece. In her spare time, she enjoys chefing, hiking, dancing, and traveling. And also, she writes poems. My second guest is Mausam Kalita. So Mausam had completed his PhD in organic chemistry at Kansas State University, and he also did his postdoctoral research at University of Utah. Mausam currently is a research scientist at Stanford University. Prior to joining Stanford, he was also assistant research professional in the Department of Biomedical Imaging at University of California, San Francisco. So in spare time, Mausam loves traveling, hiking, and also he loves writing poems. Having said that, with further ado, I'm going to start the discussion for today. So my first question for Effie, so in your opinion, I mean, what is the significance of data in your scientific research? I know we all talk about the data is the main oil of any sort of research or any industry practice. And I'm from industry, I could say that data is an integral part of my work. But I want to know more about that, how data is playing a crucial role in your scientific research, Effie.
There is thank you for the question, Sam. I think there is like two components when it comes to data. It's the everyday little amount of data that you accumulate by doing your research, and there's also the big data from experiments such as RNA-seq, for example, which you generate a ton of data, which you personally you cannot analyze without the statistics and software that we have in place because of computational models and these collaborative efforts between bioinformaticians who do not do wet lab research and the researchers that it's like me who is every day using their tools to generate a little bit of an amount of data. So I think it's such a huge deal to be able to accumulate the data and record the data, and also having a chance to go back to the data so you can see once your research has progressed whether something has changed in your conception. So I think, for example, having artificial intelligence in place where maybe it's trained in a way that it can go and track backwards all your accomplishments, all your data, that might be very useful in the future to be able to not miss a thing, because a lot of times you might have done an experiment you don't understand at some point, then you move on to the next phase. If you could bring back immediately all the information, yes, but you sometimes can. So I think analyzing the big data or even the daily data and tracking them, I think it's a big part of our life. And we see it more and more now that we are combining all the omics data and the tremendous improvements in understanding that we have from doing those type of analysis. But it's a combination of different disciplines, because I think without the help of bioinformaticians or statisticians, we cannot really conclude much. And of course, we need improvements. We need still to work towards pipelines that can be more useful.
That's relatable because collecting the data and making some kind of a pattern or meaning out of the data is one of the best, I guess, the practice which bioinformatician and biostatistician are kind of capable of doing. And it's good to know that your research area, you usually get help from them to collect the data and how we can formulate it into in a kind of a statistical way. So that kind of like whether it's coming up with a p-value or doing any sort of t-test or something, I
Exactly.
guess you rely on the biostatistician.
For basic analysis, of course, we are able to do it, but then there are other things, for example, that I don't have the training. For example, I wish I had a coding expertise so I can do the analysis, but I lack that. So on the other hand, we need also more biologists who who are also bioinformaticians, like
Mm.
that they understand both worlds very well. Because I think a lot of times we might be missing points because the bioinformatician doesn't know the biology behind of the experiment. So he does give you the big data, but we have a little bit of a wall between us. So I think in the future, this multidisciplinary type of efforts, or having all the PhDs learning how to code and be excellent in it, I think is where we should be going, I think, in the
Yeah.
future.
That's really a valid point, because that's also one of the main essence of the importance of growing need for the data scientists nowadays. Like there are certain areas I've seen that an employee with a domain matter expertise, they are moving into the data science field by learning some programming language. So I understand your thought process over there. Just once a research scientist would be proficient, efficient in R and Python, they can actually perform a lot of analysis, analytical stuffs by themselves. So in that case, you don't have to rely on biostatistician and bioinformatician. Thanks, Ify, for your feedback on these things. So I'm going to move to Mausam, and I want to get his opinion on that, how the data plays a very significant role in his research area.
Thank you, Sam, for having me. And Effie brought very interesting point, and I totally agree with her that there's huge explosion of data right now, and especially with so many modern instruments that can give you high throughput output. However, my research, I come from organic chemistry background. So I do a lot of organic synthesis, and right now I'm doing radiochemistry and also targeting especially brain. So to make small molecules which can cross blood-brain barrier and go to the brain. So in all these three aspects, like organic synthesis, radiochemistry, and designing tracer for brain, need some kind of predictive ability. And as you know, in organic chemistry, we make different bonds. So basically the traditional way of designing a molecule is you basically start from the target and then you see which bond you should break first, and you basically work backward.
The pattern, like trying to trace back the pattern.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, and it's called retro synthesis, and it was started by Easy Corey in 1960s. And until now, that was the main way for organic chemists to design organic synthesis. So you look at a molecule and see how you can break the molecule into smaller pieces, and what starting material you can start with. And also you look at which molecules will have, like give you the optimum yield. Some reaction give you better yield than others. So there are a huge number of reactions already been done in the literature. So recently, people have put all this information and developed some,
database or something. Yeah.
Right. And there is also a few papers that came out for artificial intelligence in organic synthetic plant, which is actually not that easy because there are so many different constraints that are applied. For example, you need to have these molecules have to be metabolically stable. It should be pH sensitive, stable at various pHs. And even with all these constraints, some of these synthetic plants have been well developed. And when organic chemists were given two set of information, like synthetic plant, one developed by the machine and one developed by human being, it's a blind experiment. And organic chemists couldn't distinguish between the two, and they think that either of the two work better. So AI has done really good progress even in organic synthetic scheme development, which is basically not that easy. And I'm pretty sure with time it will be even better. Now I'll come to the second part, which is radiochemistry. So the difference between normal organic synthesis and radiochemistry is that in radiochemistry we label a radioactive isotope, for example, fluorine 18 or carbon 11. on a molecule so that we can visualize the tracer via positron emission tomography. And this is what we do regularly here for PET-CT scan. We make these tracers and we visualize cancer, we visualize Parkinson's disease or Alzheimer's disease and other different pathologies. But one most important thing about radiochemistry is that the radio labeling step has to be the last or penultimate step. So you have to design in such a way that fluorine 18 or carbon 11 labeling should be the last step. That means the normal organic synthetic scheme has to be modified in such a way that you label that compound in your final step. So there has been some progress done, not much. A recent paper came out from University of Michigan in Peter Scott lab. And I think that this is probably the first paper of its own kind. And they used machine learning to predict the scheme for radiochemical synthesis. The final part, which I'm working on right now here, is developing molecules which can cross blood-brain barrier and goes to the brain. There are several strict criteria for that. Like, you need to look at the lipophilicity of the molecule. Then you have to look at the distribution coefficient of the molecule. Then this molecule has to be also has certain pKa value, and there has to be topological polar surface area. So all these constraints are there on this small molecule to cross the blood-brain barrier, and plus that molecule has to hit the right target. It cannot be off target. So for that, here in Stanford, in Michel Zam's lab, they are developing machine learning program to predict which molecules should we hone on for blood-brain barrier penetration. However, the predictive ability of this program is still unknown. And one of the biggest problems that we face as a scientific community as a whole is we do not have much negative data in the literature. Because when you have only positive data, it's very difficult to develop a system. Yes. Because you need to put both positive and negative data.
You won't be able to perform the sensitivity and specificity test if you don't have negative. Yeah.
Right. But still, we are moving forward in that direction. And as you know, FDA already has approved a lot of radio tracers these days for imaging, especially for neurodegenerative diseases, because we do not have many tracers for early detection of Alzheimer's or Parkinson's or multiple sclerosis. So this will be great help if the scientific community as a whole, put this positive and negative data somewhere so that, we can develop a much better program.
That's true. I mean, what I understand from that's really very informative for us to know that, like there are so many efforts been going on to bring artificial intelligence or machine learning in the chemistry area. Because, for me, I'm not an organic chemistry expert, but for me, organic chemistry is more of, again, finding the pattern, finding the bond and everything. And that's where I guess machine learning or AI could be beneficial. Maybe it will break the barrier of the human intervention, and they'll be able to predict a lot of things in future. Like recently I was reading this paper, Nature paper. It was kind of like a big breakthrough that DeepMind's, one of the AI companies did, creating kind of an AlphaFold, a software which will be able to predict the protein bands. So that's kind of like a very significant breakthrough in scientific research area driven by machine learning. So yeah, I mean, in future, I'm pretty sure there'll be more efforts will become, but at the end, I guess it's all about the data. As Mausam just mentioned, he basically touched upon a really important point. It's not about like having a data. It's all about also sometimes it's about the data quality. It's just like, as you mentioned, that you don't actually have the negative data, because that's also a very important factor. And that literally brings me to my next question to Effie. So how much do you emphasize on the data quality? Like, data is nothing, so many times we can get big data, but the amount of time we spend to find out which data would be relevant to your research and which one you can just literally opt out. So how do you determine that? Is it something you use your scientific expertise to determine the data quality and just clean the data before you put it in your research work?
Especially, so some, just to, before we move to this question
Mhm.
and answer, I would like to point out that there is a lot of investors who has already like
Mhm.
invested a lot of money in companies who are actually doing exactly that, AI
Mhm.
predicting drugs, small molecules. And one of them actually is started from Utah in Salt Lake City, called Recursion Pharma, which has raised a lot of millions, and he
Mhm.
has expanded even in Canada. And the other one is Schrodinger, which has also uh, done a lot of funding raising efforts, and
Mhm.
they are very promising for the future of drug discovery, because they have these
Mhm.
platforms where the AI can predict every single molecule that we could not do it even with high throughput techniques in the lab.
That's
So,
true.
but that is actually because of the data quality. So going there, the
Even
data
Watson also did that. IBM's
so
Watson, they
when it
also.
comes to chemistry, you know exactly how those molecules are interacting with each other. So
Mhm.
that is really a good feed for the AI to give you the right answers. When it comes to biology, we also have
Mhm.
QC in place, especially when we do uh, big data analysis. However, there is heterogeneity because of genetics, and it makes
Mhm.
sense. It's the same struggle that we have when we use animal models, also with patient samples. Like, you have different genetic background sometimes, or just it happens. But we do still have QC in place. Like, for example, let's say you do prepare samples to do an omics analysis. You will double check in multiple steps the quality of what you selected as the source to the final steps. So I think that ensures quality. But however, biology is unpredictable. Sometimes science is unpredictable. So compared to chemistry, biology is, I would say, a little bit more challenging, but still, especially for the big data, there are QC in place. And even when it comes to the everyday experiments, of course, we try to follow the steps of an SOP. So we have standard protocols that we must follow.
True.
And if you somehow go around it, or you do something different, you have to note it down, because what if that experiment give you the best results? You need to know. And that goes again to how can you ensure the best quality? The best quality would come, as I told you earlier. I think one of the points is that you need to be able to capture every moment when you're
Mhm.
experimenting. Is that possible? Maybe in the future with tools like a combination of a GoPro with AI, let's say, that is looking at you when you're doing the experiment, and it's
Mhm.
documenting every single
Mhm.
step.
Mhm.
Might be one way of making sure that you're not missing something.
I think that you actually kind of like mentioned a very valid point, especially talking about, you just mentioned that in the biology area, sometimes it's possible that you don't have the classifier. Like, I mean, in machine learning world, we have a thing called unsupervised learning. So in the unsupervised learning, I think it's kind of becoming very popular in the biology world, where you don't actually have the labels or classifier. The data is like you actually have a kind of a very sparse data set, and they're using some kind of clustering technique in the first to come up with that how they can group some data points with a similar nature. I mean, that is
You
something
know,
maybe. Yeah, go ahead,
we
please.
do actually perform blinding
Mhm.
experiments. For
Mhm.
example, a very beautiful example I have is one of my collaboration with one of my friends. He developed a software. I did the staining of these
Mhm.
tissues, and I gave him the stained tissues, and he analyzed. He was blinded. He didn't know who was who. But
Mhm.
because of the robustness, the repetitiveness, he was able to cluster. And he told me, I think this is your mutant and this is your wild type. So I was impressed, but it's the way to do it. So we usually do practice also blinding and
Blinding, okay.
randomization, because these are required analysis to avoid bias, of course, and increase reproducibility and rigor in our research. Because as I mentioned, you have outliers, so you might not be able to see the whole picture sometimes, but data is data, so we trust the data.
Yeah, I mean, whichever the way you can give some meaning to the data will be useful for any time. Yeah. So, but yeah, it's good to know about this blinding technique. It's kind of from our technology standpoint, I would consider it's kind of like a segmentation stuff. You're basically like segmenting the data set into like different groups to find out the pattern or something. That's very important, like important, I guess, for research, help you out in the further analysis. So yeah, thanks for the information, Effie. So if you also mentioned another important things is called the ethical practice of AI and machine learning, which is also becoming a very sensitive matter right now. It's not about industry or science. People are trying to understand that how our research or our AI, artificial intelligence tool or machine learning tool, will follow certain protocol or rules and regulation. So we have some guidelines or something in our industry practices, but I want to know more about if you guys, any of you have some insight about what kind of ethical practices and artificial intelligence or machine learning tool will follow in the research. So I'm going to actually ask Mausam for that, since Mausam, you mentioned there are some efforts or going on to build some machine learning tool in your area. So is that any kind of guidelines those machine learning tool are using from ethical practice standpoint?
Well, from ethical standpoint, I think it's from the research, we make sure that we have quality control in our place, like Effie mentioned in her biological research. And so from our side, when we generate data, we make sure that our data are reliable, reproducible, and the data that we are feeding to the machine should you can use it reliably. So for ethical purpose, I mean, from the AI standpoint, I'm not sure, like what kind of ethical information that AI can practice. Probably data scientists can shed more light on it. From our side, we make sure that we have our quality control in our place. For example, when we do make molecules, we have like NMR and mass spec and HPLC. All these quality control processes are applied to determine the structure of the molecule. However, from the chemistry standpoint, data generation is painfully slow because we have to make the molecules, and making molecule takes longer time, and we do not have any like high throughput reaction. I mean, we have some high throughput reaction, but mostly you apply those reaction at the end. If you have, for example, 10-step synthesis, you will apply that high throughput reaction probably in the step 9 or step 10 to build a library of the molecules. Generally, you do not make a library at the beginning. So for first 8 step, synthesis will be slow, and then you can proliferate on that on the building block.
Yeah.
But again, I think the big problem here is the risk of repeating someone's failed reaction. Like if I do not know this reaction failed somewhere in the literature, I will repeat it. And that basically slows me down. And also that slow down the whole data generation process. So I think it's important that we report both positive and negative. You can put the positive data in your main manuscript, and you can put your like negative data in the supplementary information. That should be fine too. And to Effie's point, I agree, like it's even more complicated in biology, because right now I'm working at the cross section of chemistry and biology, because we make molecules and then we apply in biological biological system. For example, when we make tracer, we inject in mice with some disease model. And after that, we image the mice through PET scanner. Then we will euthanize the mice, harvest different organs, and we'll do cryosectioning of of these organs and see the penetration of this tracer and the binding of this tracer in these organs. So these are incredibly complicated, and reproducibility in biological system is harder than chemistry, because in chemistry you're working in more like artificial condition, where all these solvents are already defined. However, in biological system you have a defined system evolved for millions of years. You do not play around with pH of the system or blood-brain barrier. Yeah. And even if you manipulate that, that will be a artificial system, not the normal like natural system. So yeah, but to your point, going back to your the ethical question, from the research side, we do our best to have all quality control in place before reporting that data to public or to our peers.
I mean, that's very important for me to know as a data scientist. If I would be indulged into any sort of activities, I need to know that ethical practice that your research scientists follow. Like, I need to get some insight about the quality control, and that will actually bridge the gap. So I think that's kind of a very important, because even if a data scientist or in a biostatistics or bioinformatics will engage in building any AI or machine learning tool, they still need to understand the domain expert. They need to have some understanding of your quality control or your, some insights about your research. Otherwise, it'll be little difficult for anyone to comprehend the full aspect of the requirement. So that's kind of like brings me to the last question for this discussion. So a question to Effie. So since now we are seeing that AI and machine learning is kind of coming into the picture, maybe it's going to help out the research scientists in future and kind of this eliminate the kind of like limitation which a human won't be able to analyze in quicker succession, like whether it's IBM Watson or any sort of machine learning tool developed by any Silicon Valley companies. Maybe it will be beneficial for research scientists in future to carry out their analysis and other sort of work in a quicker fashion. So what do you think about like how the future, I mean, in your opinion, how the future would look like, that how technology can advancement will actually take scientific research to the next level? Say suppose 10 years 15 years down the line, do you think that all the like daily routines you do, the cultural test or any sort of stuff, that kind of stuff could be automated, or you will get some help from a machine or AI bot which can help you to like run those kind of research in future? Do you envision that?
It's a very good question. I mean, if we let our imagination go wild, the way I say it is that you have like this touch screen, and the AI is running on the background every experiment that I input, and then it tells me, remember in 2018 you did this experiment, now that you inputted this new information, I can tell you what it says, you cured cancer, let's say. So in other words, like overall, like having the whole picture. And me, yes, my hard drive will forget things, but the AI is running constantly and making the connections that I need, and then tells me your next experiment should be this based on all the information you inputted. And also having the AI observing me doing the experiments and monitoring every step, let's say, that is documenting all of that, then the AI itself knows what happened and what was the output. So then it gives you the future experiments and also a holistic view of your data. So I think that will be amazing. Another thing that I still think that AI might be lacking is that indeed, sometimes you need also the critical thinking, but you also need and unbiased thinking, of course, of the AI, but you also need the creativity, because I think in biology, a lot of times we have to be creative of what else is there. And because in AI, we are just feeding what we know. So we already have a bias that we are giving there. Coming back to your ethical question, we are inputting some bias because it's what we found. But in all honesty, we don't really know every single aspect of the biology that we are studying. So I think we still need to have also the human component. So if you have read books for the future, they say that researchers, they will still be around because they are creative, and nurses, they will be around because they are caring, and AI cannot really do a very good job there yet. So I think in the future, I see that I will be using AI for the analysis, for what is next, and kind of like consult it. It's going to be my consultant. And maybe we'll have bots to help us in the lab with manual handling of specimens. So that will be actually very useful.
Okay, that's good.
That's where like I see the future is. And then combining the data in an unbiased method. But how close or far we are, I don't know. I think, as I said, and Mausam also mentioned, not having all the negative data as well is a problem. And to be honest with you, how can you input all the negative data? Because who's going to publish it? And the second part is, how can you ensure that it was negative because it's really negative, or it's negative because of a technical?
Yeah, I mean, defining the benchmark, or like, it's like a little
So who
difficult.
can?
Yeah.
I think that's a challenge right there. Maybe you guys have some ideas on how to overcome, but I find that the negative data, you're not sure sometimes, you doubt.
Yes.
With exception if we have like robots handling things. So
because I mean, what I understand, like biology is again a continuously evolving field. I mean, still we are trying to unravel the mystery of nature.
Yeah. And there will be things that we have not even fed the AI, so the AI cannot really come up with something new because it's about like patterns that it's seeing already in the files. Maybe it can be creative, I mean, predicting, but it might skip or might not see some things because it doesn't have the whole picture. Not that we have, but we are discovering a little bit by little bit every day. So
yeah,
I
I mean, that you literally mentioned a very valid point, the kind of a limitation of AI, because from data science perspective, when we build a model in AI model, so we actually have to train the model, but the training the model is basically based on the scene data set. But when you don't have when you have an unforeseen data set, that's where actually the main issue come, that how your model would be like very accurate on the unforeseen, because that scenario or that biological phenomena never happened before, but it could happen in future. But how your AI would have that? So I think that's kind of like a limitation, and the main reason we still have to rely on our human intellectual, because that consciousness, that ability, AI will never be able to equip. It doesn't matter whether Boston Dynamics come up with a better robot in future which they can dance on Elvis Presley's song or something, but they still have some limitation for which we need to have a kind of a human-driven AI system. I think the main thing is we should leverage AI for future research, but it should be a human-driven AI process, rather just an AI will take over everything. And that's where a lot of, I guess, now people are raising eyebrows that AI is going to take over human jobs, but that's not the case. Rather, AI will enable us to find something or maybe explore more things in science area, which we
will need retraining for sure. And I think that, let's say in 10 years from now, when I'll be 45, let's say, I will have for sure the need to be trained to use AI in my job. I predict that that's going to be something for a lot of us, but we're going to still have some jobs.
Of course, definitely. And so Mausam, for the same question, I would like to hear your perspective as well to wrap up this discussion.
Thanks, Sam. Yeah, I think Effie has already touched upon most of the things that I wanted to say, but from our standpoint, I worked with one of the professors here in UCSF. She is a pathologist, and so what she did, she trained the machine, shows different slides of tissues, like diseased tissue and non-diseased tissue, and the predictability and also the diagnostic capability of this AI is amazing. I mean, they are more than 90%. They are, in some cases, they are even better than human to diagnose whether the tissue is diseased or not. So in a lot of these cases, I think AI has made tremendous progress, no doubt about that. However, from the chemistry side, I think it's a little bit more complicated. It just started to pick up. And recently a paper came out from Munster, Germany, where they actually have this AI and let the AI learn by itself, and they found that um, in developing organic chemistry synthetic scheme, um, this system did incredible job. They can basically design a synthesis, and scientists can reproduce it in the lab. And this machine basically learned by itself. So they are making tremendous progress, but I do think human interference will always be required to develop novel reactions, or to develop completely give like more creative idea to AI. When we do radiochemistry side, I don't think AI can run. I mean, it will probably be able to run in future, maybe in 20, 30 years, I don't know. But right now, we have to do it by ourselves because it's radioactive. And I do not know how much we can trust the machine uh, to run radioactive reaction, and we just go home and take a nap. I don't think we can do that because radioactivity is a serious situation. So we will need human being to be there, um, to solve, or also to direct the AI what kind of reactions need to be carried out, and when purification need to be done, and at what time point we should collect the tracer and then deliver to human being. So overall, I think AI has made tremendous progress, and it will make more progress as time passes. But I believe we will always need human being to take the next step.
Definitely.
From the innovation standpoint.
Yes.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
mean,
that's
you actually mentioned a really valid point about the radioactivity. It's like the risk involved in the process. So sometimes I guess we can't trust an AI tool 100% when we have such high risk involved in some process, because anything could be possible. And even if our model would provide 100% accuracy that like our AI could handle in radioactive test, but I don't think so we can literally in 100% confident that that tool would be able to run any radioactive test in any circumstances. So that kind of risk will always be involved, and in that case we definitely need a human being or a research scientist be there who will basically foresee that process or guide that AI tool to perform that operation. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of like brings me to an end of this discussion. So thank you for all the information and provide your perspective on how like artificial intelligence and machine learning or even data could be beneficial for the scientific research. I know we are not there yet. I mean, hopefully in future there'll be more technological advancement we could see in the scientific research that help you scientists like you in biology and in chemistry area. But we will see how things will come along in future. But thanks for your time. Thanks for joining my YouTube channel. So just for my viewers, if you have any sort of like a research paper or any articles where you could basically provide some example of the implementation of AI and machine learning, so it'll be great if you can share with me, and then I can just share with my viewers, because I'm pretty sure the data science community will get a lot of benefit out of it, since from a data science standpoint, we do not have more exposure to the subject matter related to scientific research, whether it's biology, chemistry, or physics. So we need a more collaboration with the scientists to bridge that gap in future. And I'm pretty sure in future, and a scientist also get acquainted with the data science when they will get more domain expertise and become more efficient in writing programming language. So thanks, Mausam and Effie. Thanks for your time, and thanks for joining my first coffee chat. And for my viewers, don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel, because more coffee chat series featuring industry experts are forthcoming. And thanks, Effie and Mausam, one more time. So that's all for now. Thank you.
Thank you
Thanks, Sam. Thanks, Effie.
for having us. Nice to see you.